Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is a spine-tingling and intriguing tale by the wonderful mind of RealSpoopyStuff. As ever, a huge thank you to the author for allowing me to narrate her wonderful work. Please do take a second to head over to Reddit and smash an upvote on the story. It really does help the author build their presence on the Reddit platform. As ever, please do like, share and comment. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story. Entitled, I'm an exotic animal dealer and I sell things that you didn't know existed. How I started out. Let's get straight into that. There are creatures on this planet that very few people have ever seen before. My job is to find, trap and sell those creatures to the highest bidder. Before I became an exotic animal dealer, I worked at a major fast food chain. Hey, everyone has to start somewhere. I worked in fast food until I was nearly 25 years old. By that point, I had been in the industry for 10 years and the light at the end of the tunnel had long since faded to black. I didn't feel like I would ever make it out. I was doomed to slave behind a hot, greasy griddle, flipping burgers for the rest of my life. The only things that helped me were drugs and alcohol, which firmly planted my ass on the slipperiest of slopes. I hit rock bottom on my 25th birthday when I decided to go solo camping in the mountains. The concept was simple. Bring enough magic mushrooms to help me find my way out of the hell I descended into over the past decade. And enough alcohol and OxyContin to kill me if I couldn't. I was coming back to town with a plan to start thriving instead of just surviving, or not at all. On the third day of the trip, I had even less lined up than when I'd set out. All the bag of mushrooms had accomplished was making me vomit and hallucinate. The romanticism of Vision Quest had worn off completely, and the pills were becoming a likelier possibility as each hour passed. Lo and behold, the universe had other plans, in the form of a mountain lion den containing 4 grunting, mewing cubs. All I could think was that this had to be it. This had to play into my future in some way. And so I snatched all 4 cubs and hightailed it down the mountain to my car, the whole time fully expecting the mother mountain lion to broadside me and rip my cub-stealing throat out. But she didn't, and I came back to town with a plan. Within 3 days, I had sold each and every cub for over $8,000 apiece, and that's when I decided to become an exotic animal dealer. And with a shiny new nest egg in my pocket, I packed up everything I owned and moved to Florida, where the laws are looser and the demand for exotic animals was higher. I spent the next 5 years making a name for myself by buying and selling some of the most rare and dangerous animals on the planet. I've sold lions, tigers, ligers, grizzly bears, brown bears, sloth bears, black bears, snow leopards, cloudy leopards, black leopards, black panthers, pumas, alligators and freshwater, saltwater and Nile crocodiles. If it can kill you, I've priced it, packaged it and delivered it. And for those first 5 years, I loved every minute of it. Not only was I making money hand over fist, but there was something magical, some boyhood wonder attached to the job. Being not only in proximity, but in possession of a 400-pound tiger, well, that's a powerful feeling that very few have experienced. But, as it so often goes, the job got tiresome and repetitive. The boyhood wonder fizzled out. There was no longer a novelty of seeing the animals I was selling, and they began to feel like nothing more than inventory items. It was like I was flipping burgers again. I was a few south short of an early retirement when I met Arthur. Well, there was an underground, wholesale, mountain lion auction just outside of Tampa. I figured it would be my last batch of inventory. What better way to end your career than when you started it, right? And that's where I met Arthur for the first time. The two of us ended up sitting next to each other in the auction pit. And while I was huffing and fuming at the prices, which were way too high to be profitable, Arthur, he was just sitting there next to me, calmly sipping from a strangely scaled flask and chuckling anytime someone made an overpriced bid. Well, that didn't make sense to me. Why would someone come to an auction like this and not make a single bid? Was he a cop? Well, it just so happened that our vans were parked next to one another in the parking lot as well. I was fumbling with my keys at the driver's side door when I saw him approaching his van. Well, curiosity got the better of me, and so I struck up a friendly conversation with him. We introduced each other, giving each other fake names at first, as was customary, and just shot the shit for a few minutes while the other dealers loaded up and evacuated the gravel lot. And judging by the way his body swayed, whatever he had been sipping on was playing at him. When almost everyone was gone, and it was only Arthur and I left in the parking lot, I started to ask more specific questions. I noticed you didn't buy anything in there. Hell, you didn't even make a bid. I thought that was kind of funny. Prices too high? I asked him in a sarcastic tone. He smiled at that. I don't know much about price, hoss. I've been out of that game for a few years now. Don't even know how much one of those cups would retail for nowadays. What game are you in now? If you don't mind me asking, I responded. Arthur, he looked around briefly to make sure no one else was around, and then returned his gaze to me before slapping the hood of his van. Now, when I say that that van bounced around like a Mexican jumping bean, I mean it. I've transported fully grown and mighty angry Kodiak grizzlies before, and 6 of them combined couldn't make a van shake that violently. Whatever was in there was clearly something I had never dealt with before. Arthur must have seen the wave of shock wash over my face because he'd started to chuckle. What the hell he got back there? I asked alarmed. Now the businessman in me wanted to know, but the part of me that knows what something that strong can do to a man was a little more hesitant. Not as big as you would expect it, hoss, Arthur replied, still snickering lightly. Can I see it? Arthur's smile fell off of his face and a more skeptical shade took its place. Once again, he scanned the parking lot, which was completely empty except for him and I. And then he looked back at me. He studied me for a moment, sized me up, and then nodded. As he walked to the back door of the van, he gave me a warning. Now listen here, hoss. I normally charge 50 grand to show a man what I'm about to show you for free. If you say a word about it to anyone, I'm going to send 20 of the filthy little fuckers through the doggy door of your house, and they'll tear you into flesh confetti before eating every last speck. I wouldn't waste a single damn calorie feeling bad about it neither. Capiche? Well, there was a playfulness to his tone, but it didn't hide a single bit of sarcasm. I knew he would follow through, and he knew that I knew it. There wasn't a snow leopard's chance in hell that I would say a word to anyone. A hot stone of anticipation lodged itself deep in my throat, blocking any speech from coming out, and so I just nodded. Arthur nodded back, slipped his hand under the handle of the van's back door, and flung it open. Well, the first thing I noticed was how dark the cargo bay was. Didn't seem like any light from the sun, which was setting behind us, was penetrating the darkness. Something was blocking it. The second thing I noticed were 2 small, beady, blood-red eyes staring out at me from the back corner of the van. As I leaned in closer, hoping my eyes would adjust to the darkness and at least give me an outline of whatever was back there, it charged forward. All of a sudden, I was sitting on the gravel of the parking lot, 10 feet from the van. My vision had gone blurry, and every sound around me homogenized to a single constant hum. As impossible as it was, I had seen it. the grey-toned, human-like body, about the size of a preteen but much, much more muscular. The razor-sharp fangs and the jagged, pockmarked wings. Was that a fucking gargoyle? I screamed, half to Arthur and half to myself. Sure was, Haas, Arthur responded through an outpouring of laughter. And that little guy nearly gave you a heart attack. I sat on the ground for a few minutes and stared at my feet. The rational part of my brain was trying to process the impossibility of what I had just seen, but the business part was already working its magic. Gargoyles are real, and they're a gold mine. And Arthur here is the goddamn prospector. My breath was now steady and my heart rate was back to a normal speed. I looked up at Arthur. Any chance you need a partner, Hoss? I asked through a grin. The laughter faded and a look of concentration took over. It was clear that he was considering something. After what felt like an hour, he spoke. I deal with a lot worse things than that little church squatters like this on a daily basis. If you can prove that you can deal with this one, then I'll take you on as an apprentice until you make up for the $2 million you took out of my pocket by killing it. After it's repaid, we can be partners. Now, if that little fucker gets you, I ain't telling a soul you was ever even here. He'll eat up every last bit of you, and your family won't even know you ever died. If that's alright with you, then we can sort something out. Do I get a weapon? Nope. No problem. Without an ounce of hesitation, I threw myself into the back of the van. I spent the next 2 weeks in hospital. The doctors and nurses chalked my injuries up to a gator attack, and I never corrected them. The only part of me that wanted to was the part that knows gators are a hell of a lot easier to take down than goyles. On the day I was discharged, I walked out of the hospital's big front double doors to find Arthur idling his van in the tow-away zone. It's been 10 years since then, and I haven't looked back once. I'm an exotic animal dealer, and I sell things that you didn't know existed. My first big job as an apprentice. Let's get straight into that. Even there, just outside the cave's entrance, the smell of death and decay was cloying, clawing at my nose and throat in an attempt to make me retch. Yet still, after sitting there for over 2 hours, I hadn't gagged once. I refused to. This was my first big trapping mission as Arthur's apprentice. We'd done a few small jobs together up to that point, catching 4 pixies, 2 gremlins, and something called a zero-light. But, according to him, those were peanuts compared to what we were going after today. His exact words were, "Might as well have been snaring squirrels and chipmunks, Haas." Well, this was a big job, which meant a big payday, and I wasn't going to let that awful, rotting smell coerce me into puking. I didn't want to take my eyes off the prize for even a second. But what was the prize? Well, Arthur hadn't told me exactly what it was we were after. When I asked him, he said that me knowing would confuse me more than just following his orders. His orders were simple. Sit at the mouth of the cave in a muggy afternoon Florida sunshine and wait for him to run back out. When he did, shoot him with a crossbow he'd given me. That's right, shoot him with a crossbow. When I asked him what he meant, he laughed. "Line me up in the crosshairs, put your finger on the trigger and pull, Haas. That's that simple. Make sure you don't aim for my head, neck or chest, or that would be game over. No greenbacks at the end of this trip. Oh, and don't step foot in this here circle. In fact, don't move a muscle until I tell you to." And with that, almost as if he'd forgotten up until then, he pulled out what looked like a nub of sidewalk chalk from his pocket and drew a circle. about the size of a monster truck's tire, on the moist limestone between myself and the cave entrance. You step in that circle and we're both dead. Capiche? He said. Sure thing, Arthur, I responded. Just to be clear, all I have to do is sit out here with a crossbow, making sure not to step foot in that there circle, and wait for you to come out. When you do, shoot you with this crossbow, but not in the head, neck, or chest. Oh, and don't move a muscle until you say so. Is that the whole picture? That's the whole picture, Huss. You're one hell of a listener. And with that, Arthur turned away from me, swigged his scaly flask, which he did every few minutes, and trotted into the cave as nonchalantly as a chihuahua trotting through a doggy door. And for the next 2 hours, I sat there with my back against the trunk of a rather large weeping willow, and the crossbow hairs trained rigidly on the cave entrance. I studied the bow and bolt briefly, and both were real enough. The arrowhead itself was gnarly looking, with long, sharp and jagged slices of steel, about 2 inches long apiece, jutting out on all 4 corners. There was something coating the steel, some sort of liquid. It looked to be the consistency of olive oil, only with a purplish tint to it. This thing I was meant to eviscerate, so why the hell was I supposed to shoot Arthur with it? Even if I did miss his head, neck or chest, there was a massive chance that the bolt would nick an artery and he would bleed out. Well, whatever. His wish was my command. I was going to put one in him the next time he showed his face, even though it made no sense to me and seemed more like an intricate suicide plot than a mythical creature trapping mission. Now the sun was beating down hard and the humidity was suffocating, making whatever hideous stench that was steaming from the cave even more pungent. Every few seconds, I would have to wipe big beads of sweat off of my brow before they descended to my eyes and blurred my vision. And just as I was about to lower the crossbow for a second to take a drink of undoubtedly warm water from my bottle, I heard shuffling coming from the inside of the cave. I was soft at first, no louder than a leaf across the street blowing in a light breeze, but quickly became louder. I pulled the crossbow tighter to my shoulder, still peering down the sight. My adrenaline was kicking in now, and the cadence of my heartbeat became more rapid, in turn making my breathing more ragged. This clearly took some accuracy away from my shot, as I could no longer hold the crosshairs steady in a single spot. Instead, they moved in a small circular motion. That variance could well mean the difference between a neck shot and a thigh shot, or even a total miss. And the shuffling was getting louder now, turning into echoing thuds, the sound of 2 feet pumping off the limestone cave floor as they carried someone to the entrance. A barrage of questions then flashed through my mind. What the fuck was Arthur running away from? And what if I missed him completely? Would we both die? What if whatever we're here to catch comes out first? Do I shoot it or Arthur? Why couldn't I just stuck to lions and tigers, or even just retire with the millions I'd amassed selling them? And then I saw Arthur, running full speed and smiling in the dark of the cave. As soon as he got out of the shadows, I was going to pull the trigger. I took a deep breath and held it, which seemed to steady the crosshairs enough to take a reasonably accurate shot. 30 yards now. 20. 10. 15 feet. 5 feet. I squeezed the trigger and the crossbow string thrummed as it unleashed the bolt, which whizzed through the air at impossible speed. An audible punching sound erupted as the bolt hit Arthur just above the left knee, right where I was aiming, and he went down hard. I let out a breath that I was holding in and stared, and Arthur, he didn't move. After a few seconds, which had drawn out to feel like days, another sound filled the air. It was like a mix between a tiger roaring and a semi hauling down the highway at full speed, and it was coming from Arthur. His body began to twitch, then convulse, His arms and legs shot out and filled up, making them 3 times their normal size. The clothes he had been wearing faded slowly into his skin, which was now darkening in shade until it became jet black, and a coat of fur sprouted. As Arthur transformed, I realized that this wasn't Arthur at all. In fact, the real Arthur, or so I hoped, was now standing just outside the entrance of the cave, leaned up against the wall of rock and taking a deep sip from that scaled flask, and sporting his signature smile. Only about a yard from where this thing was shifting and transforming, becoming something else, becoming what it really was. When the convulsions as well as the thundering roar stopped, I was staring at something I'd never seen before. It was some sort of cat, about the size of a rhino, but leaner and more muscular, and with jet black fur and a mouth the size of a sewer cap containing about 100 white, razor-sharp teeth, each as long as a number 2 pencil. It stared back at me with a look of hellish contempt, and then it began to crouch low. All the while, Arthur just stood there smiling between big drags from his flask. It was preparing to pounce. I wanted to turn tail and run fast as I could, but there was no way I would make it back to the van. But maybe I could zigzag around the trees and throw it off a bit. Even if that didn't work, I would survive a hell of a lot longer than just waiting here for it to attack. But as Arthur hadn't said to run, he had said to stay put until he gave the word, and he hadn't given the word just yet. And so, I stayed. The massive cat jumped, mouth open wide and spear-like claws reaching out towards me. I closed my eyes and grimaced, fully prepared to be torn to shreds, but it never happened. There was a whooshing sound and then an eruption of laughter. I opened one eye and then the other, and when this massive, horrifying thing had jumped at me, its body went within the circle of chalk that Arthur had drawn on the ground earlier. Only this couldn't have been ordinary sidewalk chalk. The circular wall, transparent and milky, had shot up from the ground where the marks were now, containing the beast within, where it was now floating helplessly. I looked from the trap to Arthur, who was losing his mind with laughter, and smiled myself. "Panthera mimicus," Arthur called from where he was standing. I thought about it briefly and then chuckled. We'd caught a copycat. We were both silent for a few moments, reveling in the success of the day, until I spoke out. How does this guy stack up to some of the other shit out there? I called back, genuinely curious. This thing seemed like a world eater, and I couldn't imagine there being something more dangerous lurking somewhere. "Oh, about a 6 out of 10, Arthur responded. "You ever went toe-to-toe with a 10 out of 10? I asked. Arthur, he didn't say a word, just lifted up his beautiful scaled flask, pointed to it, and nodded. I'm an exotic animal dealer, and I sell things that you didn't know existed. The story of Arthur's flask. Let's get straight into that. I was no longer just an exotic animal dealer, nor an apprentice. Now, I was more of an ancient, mythical, and dangerous creature procurer. After the capture and sale of the copycat, Arthur had made me his full-time partner. And 2 months after the big win in Florida, the two of us sat side by side and sulking in a tavern nestled somewhere in the Trollheimen mountains of Norway. Me sipping a bottle after bottle of beer, and after swigging his beautiful, scaled flask at more rapid intervals than usual. And we had been after the range's namesake, a Norwegian mountain troll, but had struck out. After 2 weeks of tracking the troll, just as we were getting ready to lay out the trap that would capture it and net us a pretty penny, it up and disappeared. Arthur, who had caught a few trolls in the past, told me that it must have gotten a whiff of us and retreated to its cave. When I asked him if we could catch it there, he scoffed. "Might as well take a cyanide pill, hoss," he responded. "It would be easier to barehand a great white in deep water." And so we sat at the bar of that little pine-encrusted tavern in thick silence, trying to drink the disappointment away enough to get some sleep before our flight in the morning. And by the time the sun went down and those great green lights in the sky started up, we were both pretty drunk. I noticed something that night. No matter how many times Arthur drank from his scaled flask, he never had to fill it up. Not once did I see him do so. And some of the pulls he took from it seemed impossible too. Pint-sized sips from a cup-sized flask. I remembered our brief exchange after trapping the copycat. Arthur had called that great beast a 6 out of 10 on the danger scale, and so I asked him if he ever caught a 10 out of 10. He responded by pointing to his flask. I didn't follow up at the time because I figured he would tell me the story when the time was right. And well, the time seemed right just then. What better time to talk about your biggest triumph than after the big defeat? Maybe the story will put some wind back in both of our sails. I opened hesitantly, trying to walk him into telling the tale as opposed to pushing him, but he cut through my bullshit immediately. "That's a beautiful flask, Arthur," I said, turning my body towards him to show an interest in having a real conversation. "You want to know how I got it, don't you, Hoss?" he replied without even looking at me. Yes, I do. I'm curious what else is out there, you know? And how someone as small as you can take it down." Arthur sighed, keeping his eyes glued on the finished pine bar top. "That's not a happy story. It won't put lead back in your pencil. It certainly won't put it back in mine." "Oh, that's fine with me. I just want to know what we're up against." At that, Arthur turned to me with a look of anger. "We're not up against shit like that, Hoss." He sneered through his teeth. He lifted the flask up and nodded to it. "Shit like this will kill you quick. Should have killed me, but I got lucky. I didn't get paid to do it neither. I did it out of necessity. Old Arthur's final resting place would have been a ball of dung the size of a Volvo at the bottom of the ocean if I hadn't gotten lucky." He took a long pull from the flask and looked at me again, but must have seen the curiosity in my face because the hard look on his face softened. "I'll tell you what happened, Hoss, but if you ever bring it up again, I'll send you packing. That clear?" I nodded in agreement. Arthur, who was generally nondescript, spent the next half hour telling me the story in enormous detail. I'll try to recall it as best I can. Arthur grew up in a small fishing town on the Gulf Coast of Texas, and for generations his family were shrimp trawlers who made just enough to get by. He was destined for the same thing, but fate stepped in. The day after his mother was taken by cancer, Arthur, his 2 brothers, sister and father set out on their boat. They didn't have enough money to take time off and mourn. In fact, they needed even more income then to pay for the mother's funeral expenses. And so, grief-stricken and stolid, they motored into the deeper water off the coast in hopes of netting a big troop. After a few hours of trawling, the sea began to ripple harshly. There were no storms in the area and no other factors that could have caused the waves which were now starting to batter the little shrimp boat. Something under them, something in the depths and massive, was stirring. Arthur, who was busy cutting tangled nets with a fillet knife, saw it first. A flash of scales beneath the surface, stretching the length of a football field, that dwarfed the little dinghy him and his family were perched upon. He yelled to his father to turn around and head back for land, but before the boat was even halfway swiveled, something rammed them. Lifted us about 30 feet off the waves and dropped us back down. And the boat snapped in half, and Arthur and his family ended up in the ocean, treading water. One of his brothers was killed on impact and floated face down, bobbing up went down in the waves. He was the first one it took. And I say it because Arthur still doesn't know what it was for certain. He didn't think it was a kraken or leviathan. He thought it was something else, something that has never been written about before because, well, no one who has ever seen it has lived. And well, until Arthur, that is. But he refused to name it. The thing's head was the size of a cement mixer, Arthur said to me in the tavern in Norway. It had about 12 eyes, each as big around as a trash can lid, and enough teeth to give one to every American, it seemed. All I saw of it for sure was his head and neck. One by one, the creature pulled each member of Arthur's family beneath the surface. First his brother, who was already presumed dead, then his father, sister, and other brother. There wasn't even any blood in the water. They were swallowing them whole. And finally, it got Arthur. It snatched him into his mouth in a big gulp of seawater and broken ship bits. Luckily, he didn't snag any razor-sharp teeth as he poured in, but now he was floating there in the pitch-black mouth of a massive undersea monster, waiting to be swallowed. That's when Arthur realized that he was still holding the fillet knife. I just started slashing. At first the knife was bouncing back. I must have been hitting the teeth. But then it found meat and the cut started to slice through the flesh of the thing's mouth. I heard it start to groan and the water in its mouth sloshed around violently as it whipped its head back and forth, which actually helped me because I ended up in a little pocket of air. As the beast whipped and thrashed, pained by the deep cuts Arthur was making, it opened up its mouth just enough to let some light in. That light gave Arthur an idea of his surroundings and brought into view a fleshy, gelatinous sack at the top of the monster's throat, where a human's tonsils would be. Arthur let his body sink to the bottom until his feet found purchase, and then he braced himself. He launched from the bottom, fillet knife held high above his head, into the sack at the back of his throat. I pulverized that thing, Hoss. Whatever it was, slice it to bits. That's what killed it, cause that's when it stopped thrashing and his mouth opened up enough for me to swim out. Luckily, we were both still near the surface. I swam up, took a big breath of fresh air, and then I swam back under, eyes open, ready to finish it off. But I had. Arthur swam back down and saw that all dozen of the beast's eyes had rolled back in its body, at least what he could see of it, only the head and the neck, which extended down into the dark where the rest of its body was still beginning to descend into the depths. I took that fillet knife and sliced a good chunk of skin, probably the size of a welcome mat, off of the thing's snout. I don't know why, it just felt right. And then I watched it sink into the darkness. Arthur was rescued by another fishing vessel a few hours later, keeping a piece of skin, which later became his flask, rolled up and stuffed into his waders. But he didn't say a word of the creature to his rescuers or anyone else. He said there was no point. There are creatures in this world that don't feed off meat and veggies, Hoss. My family have been out to that spot hundreds of times, sometimes even chumming the waters, and never come face to face with something like that. Arthur said, taking another massive pull from his flask. It came up because we were grieving. That's what it ate. We were just containing it. I don't know how I know that, but I do. I can say there's a certainty, as I can say that I am shit-faced right now. He smiled for the first time since starting the story. I returned it. By acknowledging that thing and the grief it caused me, I feel like I'm still feeding it. And why in the fuck would I want to do that, Hoss? That's where Arthur ended his story. As promised, I never brought it up again. Wow, 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 wow. Another one, wow. Absolutely awesome, riveting and intriguing mini-series there from the wonderful mind of RealSpoopyStuff. Sort of a what would Joe Exotic do next if everything hadn't gone horribly wrong for himself. What a spin. Fantastic writing. Of course, a big thank you to the author for allowing me to narrate her wonderful story on the show. I do hope you enjoyed my narration, and I really do look forward to more of your work in the future. Guys and girls, as ever, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. I hope you're all well and happy, guys. Friends and family alike, and are keeping fit and focused as possible during these testing times. But above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.